Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and welcome to our main edition coming to you live from Warsaw of World News Tonight here on TVP World. Tonight we'll focus on Ukraine's offensive into Russia, while Kyiv is also conducting a diplomatic offensive, telling its Western partners if decisions are made, Ukraine will be successful on the ground. If not, don't blame Ukraine, blame yourselves. Ukraine desperately needs a green light to use Western weapons on targets in Russia. That's coming up in just a bit, but first off, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. In Germany's local elections, the populist far-right AfD has the best chance of winning. An Israeli opposition leader says Netanyahu was indifferent and failed to act ahead of the October 7th attack by Hamas. Belarusian returns home to be arrested after being denied asylum and deported by Sweden. We start off tonight right here in Poland. Today, the Polish National Electoral Commission says it has rejected a campaign finance report submitted by the Law and Justice Party. The former ruling party now stands to lose state subsidies for 3 years unless the allegations of mismanagement of funds are overturned by the Supreme Court. Our reporter Kazimierz Wysiak has more.
We're standing here in front of the Polish Electoral Committee in Warsaw, and we've just heard unprecedented news from the head of the committee, which the committee has rejected the financial report of the Law and Justice Party. And this means huge trouble for the main opposition party, the Conservative camp, as now they have 14 days to appeal that decision. And then the Supreme Court will decide whether this appeal will be accepted. If not, the Law and Justice Party could lose all of its state subsidies for the next 3 years. That means €6 million annually for the funding of the party. That would be a major blow for the Law and Justice Party. The other decision announced here today was that the Law and Justice Party will receive 10 million zloty less, so about €2 million less for the returns of the cost of its political campaign for the year 2023, for the previous elections last year.
The Electoral Committee, through a majority of votes, decided that all the evidence provided to us by public institutions points to serious violations of the rules of electoral campaigning. Keep in mind that we need to make sure everyone is treated equally when leading their electoral campaigns.
Now, the politicians of the Law and Justice Party are certainly not happy with this outcome. It was previously rumored that the committee would only take away some of the funding. Now it seems that they could take away all of the subsidies, and the Law and Justice Party politicians are definitely not happy with that.
What has happened to Law and Justice today will likely one day happen to Donald Tusk's regime. He won't stay in power forever.
To give you an explanation on what were the accusations here, the Law and Justice Party was accused of mishandling public funds in order to promote its political campaign for the parliamentary elections last year. So like I said, the Law and Justice Party now has 14 days to appeal that decision to the Polish Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, if that happens, has 60 days to make its decision on that ruling. We will give you the latest updates right here on TVP World. My name is Kazimierz Wysiak.
If we are allowed to strike, we will decrease Russia's capacity to inflict damage on our critical infrastructure, says Ukraine's foreign minister, who met with EU foreign ministers in Brussels today. Kyiv is pressing its allies to allow the use of Western weapons to strike facilities inside Russia that are being used to attack Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War has identified 280 legitimate military targets which are in range of Western weapons in Kyiv's possession.
Another restless night in Ukraine's capital. Ukrainian authorities say they shot down 15 drones launched by Russia. Debris from the drones damaged a residential building and caused a fire in another one. Residents and local authorities continue to clean up the damage caused by two overnight attacks on Kryvyi Rih and Zaporizhia. Both cities were targeted by drones and missiles.
We are not only talking about the supply of weapons and ammunition with our partners, but also about the strength of our unity. We continue to insist that they make decisions now and lift the restrictions on Ukraine for long-range strikes.
Russia uses military bases located far from the border to launch missiles into Ukraine. The lack of authorization to use long-range missiles against Russia has hampered Ukraine's efforts on the battlefield. Although the United Kingdom has approved the use of its Storm Shadow missiles in Russia, the decision is still awaiting approval from the United States.
If we are supplied with sufficient amount of missiles, if we are allowed to strike, we will significantly decrease the capacity of Russia to inflict damage on our critical infrastructure.
Kuleba is right. It's clear that Ukrainian forces, well equipped, can change the course of the war.
The use of missiles provided by EU members was the topic of today's discussions in Brussels. In the meantime, Ukraine says it has constructed its own long-range weapon, which combines the features of a missile and a drone.
This new effort, also on the Ukrainian part, to develop the Palyanytsia, if I pronounced that correctly, is significant because it wouldn't come without any restrictions on the targets that can be hit. And that's really important because at the moment, as Gabrielas Landsbergis has said, Russian bombers that are hitting Ukraine every day are better protected than Ukrainian civilians.
Ministers meeting in Brussels are also trying to bypass Hungary's veto on the EU's eighth tranche of aid to Ukraine, amounting to 6 billion euros. Hungary has also been blocking EU funds earmarked for member states, which have already provided support to Kyiv. Poland is waiting for a 450 million euro refund.
Russians are throwing all their forces into the fight, says the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian military, Oleksandr Syrsky. He reported that he inspected the brigades defending the Pokrov sector in the Donetsk region. Now let's go to Kyiv and our reporter, Oz Chatterjee. Hello, Oz. Now, does Ukraine intend to defend itself? How exactly does it intend to do that there in the Donetsk region and, of course, in Pokrovsk?
Well, this was quite an important visit from the Commander-in-Chief, General Syrsky, today to troops stationed in the Donetsk region, where, according to Kyiv, now they're certainly not downplaying it. The heaviest fighting is ongoing in that Russian push, that salient towards the vital supply hub of Pokrovsk. While visiting the troops, Syrsky did speak about their objectives, talked about strengthening the defenses of Pokrovsk. It doesn't look like they're looking to abandon Pokrovsk to the advance of the Russians. He also talked about making sure the supply routes for much needed ammunition continues to make it to the front lines where it's most needed. Now, how successful the Ukrainians are going to be in those objectives remains to be seen, but it's very clear the Russians have no intention of relenting in their push towards Pokrovsk, which is now endangering the entire Donetsk Oblast.
Now, Oz, there are also reports that Ukraine has lost its first F-16 fighter jet. What do we know so far?
So, U.S. officials are briefing the press, not by named officials yet, briefing the press that a F-16 was downed on Monday during that large wave of Russian attacks. Now, the U.S. officials are briefing to the press that they don't believe that the plane was shot down. So it could be a technical error or pilot error. We do know from the Ukrainians that a pilot, Oleksiy Mes, of the Ukrainian Air Force, was killed earlier this week. So it's believed to be him. And in the obituary posted by the Ukrainian Air Force today, they said he shot down 3 cruise missiles and 1 strike UAV during that large bombing attack on Monday before losing his life. So clearly this was a big issue for the Ukrainian Air Force. They don't have many F-16s, but look, this is part and parcel of flying combat sorties. It's an incredibly dangerous job, and even when there isn't enemy fire involved, planes can suffer malfunctions and can crash, killing the pilot. This has happened to Russia a lot during the course of the war, but because they have so many pilots and so many planes, it's less news. But here, one of the F-16 pilots, this is going to be more of a loss to Ukraine of the pilot than the F-16, because training those pilots has taken a long time, and Ukraine has precious few pilots to spare, particularly the ones that are trained on the new Western equipment that's arriving. So a dark week for Ukraine here in response to those attacks caused by Russia in the beginning of the week, still having an impact on the people living in Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. Oz Karaji reporting from us live from Kyiv. Thank you for that, and keep yourself safe. Local state elections in eastern Germany this Sunday might see the far-right party Alternative for Germany top the polls. Votes in Saxony and Thuringia may also see a new left conservative party, the BSW, do well. They are both anti-establishment and anti-immigrant and want to end the war in Ukraine by halting Germany's weapons deliveries to Kyiv. Analysts are warning that strong showings at the polls could impact national policy.
Cheers of support as this Alternative for Germany leader takes to the stage in Thuringia, where forecasts predict the hard-right party will top the polls. It's a similar situation in Saxony. The AfD has up to 30% support in the two states. A hard-left populist party, the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, known as the BSW, is also Eurosceptic, anti-immigration, Russia-friendly and against military support for Ukraine.
And it will be very difficult to create this government, and also how, for instance, Sarah Wagenknecht made the topic of the support of Ukraine and peace in Europe as a major topic also of the local elections will impact on the federal government.
Aware that immigration has become a major issue, Chancellor Olaf Scholz vowed to increase deportations after visiting the site where 3 people were killed by a suspected extremist from Syria. Analysts say a strong showing by the AfD and BSW will impact national politics.
So I think Germany will shift its positions more in the direction on migration, and maybe also in Ukraine. I think that we will have to see. I'm a bit more skeptical because there's a consensus among the other parties that we need to support for Ukraine, but it will put this government under pressure to change also the discourse in the EU.
Berlin will be anxiously awaiting Sunday's results, knowing they may have far-reaching consequences.
Now to the United States, where the latest poll from Fox News, a channel widely known for their strong support of Republican Donald Trump, shows Kamala Harris gaining support in crucial battleground states in the South. Here are the details.
Both the Harris and Trump campaigns are currently courting swing state voters. The latest polls, meanwhile, show Harris slowly pulling ahead of Trump in crucial Sunbelt states. A Fox News poll conducted shortly after RFK's endorsement of Trump shows Harris with a significant 7 percentage points lead as a candidate who will unite the country. Despite being the incumbent vice president, she is neck and neck with Trump in terms of bringing change. Sunbelt voters are more divided on policy issues. Trump has a significant lead on immigration, the Gaza war, and the economy, while more voters trust Harris to handle healthcare and abortion. Overall, in an average of the 4 states, Harris is ahead of Trump by a single point, 50% to 49%.
Harris has the wind at her back, and that she's actually campaigning in states that now the Republicans are going to have to defend and spend money.
Harris has set a campaign donation record, raising more than $500 million in a little over a month.
She has the ability, with so many resources and so much money, that she can go into Nevada, put people and spend money on TV ads, and do the same thing in Arizona, do the same thing in North Carolina, do the same thing in Georgia.
Donald Trump is meanwhile raising money by selling non-fungible tokens under the name of the official Donald Trump digital trading card collection. The move comes as the former president's social media platform Truth Social has hit its lowest valuations since it began trading on the Nasdaq in March of this year.
These cards show me dancing and even me holding some bitcoins.
This could be a new, brighter beginning for EU-UK relations. Upon his visit to Berlin, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer showcased his determination to re-establish closer working relationship with Germany and the entire EU, the extent of which he is willing to go the distance to mend ties is, however, somewhat limited. And now joining me is our UK correspondent, Claudia Travinska, to tell us more. Hello, Claudia. So what can you tell us there from London?
So when we're looking at the warming up, the resetting of the relationship between the UK and the rest of Europe, we see Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Labour government's head, Keir Starmer, visiting what's here in the UK been deemed as two major powers within the European Union, so Germany and France. We know that Keir Starmer visited Germany in the past days. He's now in France. But I guess the most reasonable thing to do would be to hear from Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself. So let's hear what he had to say during an official conference that he held with Olaf Scholz.
When it comes to the wider reset with Europe, I'm absolutely clear that we do want a reset. I've been able to repeat that here today, a reset with Europe, a reset with the EU. That does not mean reversing Brexit or re-entering the single market or the customs union, but it does mean a closer relationship on a number of fronts, including the economy, including defence, including exchanges.
So let's dissect what he said only a second ago. The first part is to create a working relationship, a functional working relationship, because the UK is now closer to the EU than it's been in years with the Labour government headed by Keir Starmer. The basis of this is going to be establishing a new economic relationship, so a series of agreements with European countries such as Germany in order to boost trade, create new job placements, as well as boosting the economic growth for both countries, Germany and the United Kingdom. So this is something that they're going to focus on. But when it comes to that cooperation, it is not only about the economy, but it is also about working towards sorting the problem of legal migration. Both Germany and the UK are looking closely at this situation, especially that there is a discussion here in the United Kingdom as to how to stop the illegal migration, how to stop the illegal boat crossings and human trafficking, a big subject for the Labour government, even though the Labour government scrapped the Rwanda plan introduced by the Conservative government earlier this year. So we know that there is going to be a sharing of intelligence, sharing of data between Germany and the United Kingdom. And the treaty is going to be partly based on the agreement that was previously made between Paris and London. So this is something that is going to be incredibly important, as Labour is not stepping away from its responsibility to provide answers when it comes to illegal migration. As I mentioned before, Keir Starmer is now in Paris. He's talking to Emmanuel Macron, and he's going to try and warm up the relationship. However, just as he said in his official statement during the press conference, this does not mean the resetting of the relationship does not mean the reversal of Brexit. He is also approaching the idea of having an exchange, a human exchange between the countries with a lot of distance. Such an exchange would allow, for example, people from Germany, people up to 30 years of age to come to the UK and work here. Student exchange is in the cards. This is something that Germany definitely made very clear they're looking into, and they want to make sure that this is going to be something that is going to be pushed forward.
Well, hopefully the heat there from Brexit is finally cooling off a little bit and can start moving forward. Claudia Travinska joining us live from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Balancing between the East and the West, that's what Serbia has been trying to do for the past 2 years. Now, the Serbian government wants to boost its air force with the purchase of French fighter jets. This is one of the main topics of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Belgrade. Our correspondent Ovidiusz Nichea has been following the visit closely. Hello, Ovidiusz. So what can you tell us? What's new in this development?
Well, the balancing between the East and West, or more precisely between Russia and the European Union, is a great way to put it. Serbia is one of the very few European countries to have maintained friendly relations with Russia despite the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. On the other hand, we can see many efforts to boost its ties with the European Union, and this Rafale deal, other agreements, and the welcoming of French investments here in Serbia is seen as an effort to win a friend in Paris to perhaps help with the European integration of Serbia. Serbia has been an EU candidate since 2012, but has been lagging on several issues, several reforms, rule of law, the fairness of the elections, just to name a few. So it definitely could use some strong partners, some strong relations with friends, and that's why I believe the Serbian administration is treating this visit very seriously. That's why this extraordinary reception with military honors, that's why also Belgrade has been decorated with French flags all over the city. I believe it's to make sure that French President Emmanuel Macron is as welcome as possible here in Serbia. Don?
All right, Ovidius Nicea reporting for us live from Belgrade, Serbia. Thank you very much for that. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has just shared intel that could cast a completely different light on the ongoing war in Gaza. According to a statement given by Lapid to an independent commission inquiry probing the government's intelligence failure on October 7th, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu knew of a possible Hamas attack ahead of the infamous date.
It's hard to believe that these scenes happened over 10 months ago. For many in Israel and around the world, Hamas's horrific attack on October 7th feels as if it happened yesterday. Many continue to deal with the consequences of that attack, either by calling for their relatives to be released from Hamas captivity or praying over their loved ones' graves.
Each time there's an obstacle. One time it's called Rafah, now it's called the Philadelphia corridor, and God help us, there'll be more in the future. We need this to end. After 327 days, everyone needs to come out. We all understand to make this happen, we need a ceasefire in order to bring everybody out.
This fate, however, could have been avoided, according to new testimony given by Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid. In his words, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu knew of a mounting threat from Israel's enemies, who had identified weaknesses in the country's defenses in late August of 2023. The Israeli opposition leader also said he's determined to disprove the myth that neither Netanyahu nor Israeli military staff knew of the situation beforehand. Yair Lapid shared that the Netanyahu cabinet's insistence on reforming the judicial system in Israel, which led to a wave of anti-government protests, made the country look less stable and more susceptible to attacks from the outside. He also claims that in the run-up to October 7th, Israel's military deterrence, quote, eroded, prompting Israel's enemies to seize the opportunity and launch a full-scale attack against the country, plunging Israel into a nearly all-out war, resulting in nearly 1,500 Israeli casualties and over 40,000 Palestinian deaths.
Alexander Lukashenko continues to imprison anyone that dares to oppose him. This time, his victim is a man who was deported from Sweden after he and his family were denied political asylum.
Sweden is often seen as the best destination for people looking to escape their past. It's not easy to get into the country, however, especially for people looking for political asylum. The same was true for a Belarusian family which asked not to be named by the media. A mother and her son were deported back to Belarus upon not getting a positive response to their asylum request. The woman's daughter is also scheduled to be deported back to Belarus next week. Right after entering Belarus, the son was immediately arrested on unspecified charges, while the mother was allowed to travel back to Minsk. According to the most recent reports, the arrest was retaliation for the family opposing Alexander Lukashenko's regime in the past. According to testimony from one of the family members, the father of the family died in a Belarusian prison after taking part in a wave of protests against Alexander Lukashenko. The same fate is likely awaiting the son, who has already been put behind bars. So why weren't they accepted into Sweden?
The fact is that in order to get asylum in Sweden, you need to prove very clearly that you are in danger of being detained at home, and it is difficult, including in cases concerning Belarus. We know what is happening there, but it is very difficult to prove that it is you who will be detained.
According to the Vyasna human rights group, over 1,300 people are currently unfairly imprisoned in Belarus. Most of them were arrested and charged for political reasons, as opposing the Lukashenko regime is synonymous with a life behind bars.
Ukraine is on a diplomatic offensive to get the West to remove its own self-imposed red lines, saying they need permission, and they need it now in order to positively affect the situation on the ground and Russia's ability to continue the war. Now, joining us here to discuss is Elizabeth Brau, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
And Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Hello, Ivana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, I'd like to start off with just one question from the U.S. perspective, because as we see, Dmytro Kuleba has gone to Brussels, and he's actually begging his European partners to somehow influence the situation in the United States. And I'd like you both to sound off on this. Where do we think the Biden administration is currently with the incursion into Kursk? Do they still believe that this is escalatory and maybe a step towards World War III, or are they starting to reevaluate these self-imposed, as I've sort of described it, red lines? And let's start with you, Elizabeth.
Well, it doesn't really matter what the Biden administration thinks at this point, because the incursion is already taking place, and it would be ridiculous for the Biden administration, or indeed any other Western government, to say, well, we shouldn't be doing that. So,
but they need to use the use of the long-range weapons. The Institute for the Study of War has identified 280 targets which are in a range of ATACMS right now on the territory of Ukraine. So this seems to be a very desperate measure for President Zelensky.
Correct. And I think what the Ukrainians did so brilliantly with this incursion was that they essentially asked for forgiveness rather than permission, which is always a good strategy if you want to do something that you don't think your partners will agree with you about. And so the Ukrainians conducted this incursion, launched this incursion. It's going pretty well. And rather than having waited for permission from the Biden administration and other Western governments, they essentially are now saying afterwards, well, sorry about that, but now we are doing it. And I think what is significant, though, is that it's actually hasn't proven as disastrous as Western governments had worried about. Disastrous in terms of Russian escalation, and that's what we've been fearing all along. What the West has been fearing all along, that Ukrainian attacks on Russia would lead to very dangerous escalation. That hasn't happened this time. So Ukraine has essentially proven certain Western governments wrong, and it may lead to a reevaluation of the red lines that you mentioned earlier.
Ivana, your thoughts?
So the Biden administration has a long history of actually fearing escalation. So as Elizabeth just explained, the situation related to the Kursk, but also not only that, actually, I also watch the Russian news, and Putin said basically that after Kursk, there is no negotiations possible. Second thing is Russia has promised to clarify its nuclear doctrine. And let's not forget it, Putin is not a military guy. He's a KGB intel guy. He understands very well what resonates with Washington, that policymakers here, they fear escalation, they fear nuclear threats. And Putin, that's part of his psychological games that he has been playing against the West, when in fact, Putin's decision-making process is very different. Whatever the Biden administration does or says, it is not going to impact already his strategy on Ukraine. But however, he also understands very well by playing those psychological games against the West, that actually helps the West to appease him even further, not to allow Ukraine to defend itself properly and finally to win.
Elizabeth, you said that they kept this secret from their U.S. partners and other European partners. We saw the counteroffensive last year in which they shared that information what they were going to do in the counteroffensive, and it utterly failed. But this looks very different, and because they kept it so secret. So it's also been said that the presidential candidates and Joe Biden will be informed of this 4-point victory plan and exactly what they want to achieve. Is this a good idea to disclose this information with both presidential candidates? One of them may not make it. One of them will not make it, for sure.
Yes, there are two risks, I think, from a Ukrainian perspective when it comes to informing Western allies. One is that the Western allies will say, well, that's not a good idea, we won't support you. The second risk is that somebody along that communication chain will decide to tell somebody else, even though it's obviously highly classified information. But anyway, there is a risk that that information ends up in the wrong hands and that the surprise element is then gone. And clearly that's what those two things are two really crucial aspects that the Ukrainians have been worrying about and decided that they would do it differently. So I think when it comes to informing the presidential candidates, the Ukrainians will do it with those two considerations in mind. And I will be curious to see, in fact, I don't think we will ever know for sure, but I would be very curious to know whether the Ukrainians decide to tell the presidential candidates and the running mates all the aspects of what they are planning to do, or just certain aspects of it.
Ivana, since they didn't tell their Western partners, their allies, of this incursion or their planned incursion, what about the use of Western weapons to maybe attack some of those targets inside of Russia? Maybe they should use them and surprise their Western partners in their use.
Indeed, as a matter of fact, that's precisely what Russia is saying, that no matter what the United States says and impose certain restrictions, they believe that the United States and Ukraine, they're just bluffing, and the United States is actually supporting Ukraine. So I always like to say, if actually Putin believes that, and we should just literally play along those lines and allow Ukraine to use the weapons and to hit Russia where it hurts most, because it's Russia that escalated first. And as I said multiple times in your show, this war, in Putin's view, it's not only against Ukraine. Putin is waging war against NATO, and it's definitely high time, for the West, especially Washington, to stop pretending that this is not influencing and that this is not also having impact on the West. They do understand why the Biden administration fears certain escalation, especially around the elections times here, and all possibilities that Russia can do in terms of sabotage and doing different influence operations inside the country to harm Washington. But nevertheless, allowing Ukraine to hit the targets inside Russia is not going to change the calculus for Putin.
Okay, well, Elizabeth Braun and Ivana Stradner, thank you very much for joining us tonight and explaining your thoughts. We very much appreciate it. Thank you to you both. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time, and good night.